What if I told you there is an entire US state where 4 of its own governors went to federal prison, where the law says you can legally call the police on someone for gargling in public, where dead people have literally floated out of their own graves after rainstorms, and where the state is physically disappearing into the ocean at a rate of 1 football field every single 100 minutes? And somehow, over 1 million people still choose to live there? That state is Louisiana, and we found 71 things about it that will make you question everything you thought you knew about America. Stay until the end. Number 45 alone will blow your mind. If Louisiana just broke your brain in the first 20 seconds, wait till you see what's coming. Smash that hype button right now so the algorithm panics and shows this to everyone you know. 1. Louisiana runs on a completely different legal operating system than every other state in America. While 49 states follow English common law, Louisiana quietly operates under French civil law, a system imported from Napoleon's France and baked permanently into the state's legal code since 1803. A lawyer trained anywhere else in America walks into a Louisiana courtroom and immediately feels like he showed up to a chess tournament knowing only how to play checkers. The entire legal foundation of this state is structurally incompatible with the rest of the country, and nobody seems particularly bothered by that fact. 2. A chef in Louisiana once looked at a chicken, a duck, and a turkey, and thought the real problem was that they were 3 separate birds. So he stuffed the chicken inside the duck, shoved the whole situation inside a turkey, and called it a meal. Louisiana named this culinary fever dream the turducken, and then somehow convinced the rest of America that serving a bird inside another bird was a completely reasonable and serious holiday tradition. Food Network covered it. Grocery stores started selling it. The entire country nodded and said, yes, this makes total sense. 3. Louisiana is actively disappearing into the Gulf of Mexico and has been for decades. Every 100 minutes, the state loses an entire football field of land to the ocean, the fastest land loss rate recorded anywhere on Earth. Scientists have documented it. Engineers have studied it, politicians have debated it, and the land keeps vanishing anyway. Coastal communities that existed on maps 20 years ago are now underwater. The state is not sinking metaphorically as a political statement. It is literally, physically, geologically dissolving into the Gulf, while everyone watches and files more reports. 4. Louisiana treated the position of state governor like a rotating door to federal prison for most of the 20th century. 4 sitting or former governors were actually convicted and jailed, a number so embarrassing that no other state in America comes close to matching it. Political corruption was not a scandal in Louisiana. It was practically a listed qualification on the job application. Voters knew their governor might end up in handcuffs and elected him enthusiastically anyway. The state did not fix the problem. It simply got more comfortable watching the news coverage. 5. The Battle of New Orleans was America's greatest land victory of the War of 1812, and it was also completely pointless. Andrew Jackson led his forces to a stunning defeat of the British Army in January 1815, killing over 2,000 soldiers in the process. The problem was that the war had officially ended 2 weeks earlier with a signed peace treaty in Belgium. Nobody in Louisiana had received the news yet because information traveled by ship across the Atlantic. Over 2,000 British soldiers died for a battle that was already legally over before the first shot was fired. 6. Louisiana is the only state in America where a party day is written directly into official government law. Mardi Gras is a recognized state holiday, meaning courts close, schools shut down, and government offices lock their doors so that everyone can go watch people throw plastic beads from decorated floats. Every other state has Mardi Gras as a cultural event. Louisiana made it legally mandatory time off. The state essentially told its judges, teachers, and bureaucrats that attending a parade was more important than running the government for one Tuesday every year. 7. New Orleans buries its dead above the ground, and the reason is genuinely horrifying. The water table beneath the city sits so high that a coffin placed underground after heavy rain will literally float back up to the surface. Coffins have physically emerged from the earth in New Orleans cemeteries, forcing the city to develop an entirely different burial system using above-ground stone vaults. The solution was elegant and the problem was deeply unsettling. The city essentially had to redesign death logistics because the ground itself kept returning the bodies. 8. Louisiana sits on billions of dollars worth of proven oil reserves and has been pumping petroleum wealth out of its ground and coastal waters for over a century. It consistently ranks among the 3 poorest states in the entire nation. The money flows out and the poverty stays in, a contradiction so dramatic that economists study it as its own specific case. The state produces energy that powers half the country and cannot afford to properly fund its own schools or roads. Louisiana is the only place that found buried treasure and still ended up broke. 9. When Louisiana was originally organized as a territory, whoever drew the map of its administrative divisions did not use rivers, mountains, or roads as boundaries. They used Catholic church districts. Every parish boundary in Louisiana traces directly back to the geographic reach of a specific Catholic congregation, meaning the entire political and administrative map of the state was literally designed by the church in Rome. Louisiana did not separate church and state when drawing its borders. It handed the church a pen and said, "Draw whatever you want," and then kept those lines permanently. 10. Cajuns spent generations eating crawfish because nobody else in America wanted them. They were swamp creatures, bottom feeders, the food you ate when nothing better was available. Wealthy families refused them. Restaurants ignored them. The rest of the country considered them trash. Louisiana kept eating them anyway and quietly built an entire industry around a food everyone else rejected. The state now produces 90% of all crawfish consumed in the United States and holds nationally covered crawfish eating competitions with real prize money. The trash food won. Louisiana was right the entire time. 11. New Orleans is built inside a bowl sitting below sea level, surrounded by water on every side. The Mississippi River runs above the city. Lake Pontchartrain sits above the city. The Gulf of Mexico is pushing toward it from the south. Engineers built an elaborate system of levees and pumps just to keep the whole place from flooding on a regular Tuesday afternoon. Over 1 million people looked at this geographical situation, reviewed all available information, and decided to move there anyway. New Orleans is the most aggressively irrational city location in the entire United States, and its residents are extremely proud of that. 12. Louisiana locks up more of its own citizens per capita than any country on Earth. Not any other state. Any country, including authoritarian governments that human rights organizations formally condemn every year. International watchdog groups publish reports about Louisiana's incarceration rate with genuine alarm, and the state responds by incarcerating more people. The land of jazz, crawfish, and Mardi Gras also holds the global record for imprisoning its own population at a rate that makes foreign governments look comparatively lenient. Louisiana built a party culture and a prison culture simultaneously and excelled equally at both. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte owned 828,000 square miles of North American territory and sold the entire thing to America in 1803 for $15 million. That works out to approximately 4 cents per acre for land that now contains several major American cities, enormous oil reserves, and the entire Mississippi River corridor. Napoleon needed the money to fund his European military campaigns and considered the land too far away to defend properly. Thomas Jefferson could not believe the price was real. Napoleon signed the paperwork anyway. The greatest real estate deal in human history happened because one man was in a hurry. 14. Louisiana is the only state in America where voodoo operates as a legally recognized official religion with full constitutional protection. Practitioners hold state-issued licenses. Ritual animal sacrifice is permitted under religious freedom protections. No other state in the country extended those same protections to the same practices. A tourist visiting New Orleans can walk past a licensed voodoo practitioner operating a completely legal religious business 2 blocks from a Catholic cathedral, and neither establishment finds that arrangement unusual or worth commenting on. Louisiana normalized something the rest of America still debates in federal court. 15. Above-ground tombs in New Orleans operate on a rental agreement, and the consequences of missing a payment are immediate and deeply unpleasant. If a family stops paying the lease on their ancestors' vault, cemetery workers physically remove the remains, push them to the back of the tomb, and rent the front space to the next paying family. The original tenant does not leave the vault entirely. They simply get relocated to the rear to make room for someone whose family remembered to write the check. It is an eviction notice delivered to a person who has been dead for decades. 16. In 1860, Louisiana had more millionaires per capita than any other place in North America. The entire economy was built on sugar plantations running on enslaved labor, and the wealth it generated was staggering by any measure of that era. Louisiana was simultaneously the richest state in the country and operating the most morally catastrophic economic system in American history. The millionaires hosted lavish parties in New Orleans mansions and called their system civilization. The people generating all that wealth received nothing and owned nothing. Louisiana built the most profitable economy in America on the worst possible foundation. 17. After the Civil War, Louisiana created a jury law requiring only 10 of 12 jurors to agree for a criminal conviction, instead of the unanimous verdict required everywhere else. The law was not an accident or an oversight. It was deliberately designed to make it easier to convict freed black men and send them into forced prison labor. The system ran exactly as intended for over 150 years. The United States Supreme Court finally struck the law down in 2020, meaning Louisiana operated a racially engineered justice system well into the 21st century before anyone with authority made it stop. 18. During the Civil War, Union naval forces blockaded New Orleans and cut off the city's coffee supply entirely. New Orleans ran on coffee the way machines run on fuel, and the shortage was immediately catastrophic for daily life. Someone discovered that roasted chicory root could be blended with whatever real coffee remained to stretch the supply further. The city adopted the practice out of wartime desperation. The blockade ended, real coffee returned, and New Orleans decided the inferior wartime substitute actually tasted better than regular coffee. The city has been voluntarily drinking the emergency ration version ever since and insists everyone else is wrong. 19. Louisiana has no natural lakes anywhere in the entire state. Every body of water that locals and maps casually call a lake is technically a lagoon, an estuary, a tidal basin, or a man-made reservoir. Lake Pontchartrain, the massive body of water sitting directly north of New Orleans, is technically an estuary connected to the Gulf of Mexico, while Louisiana is essentially one enormous interconnected swamp that decided to give its water features more respectable-sounding names. The state has been calling things lakes for so long that correcting anyone about it now feels personally offensive to them. 20. Edwin Edwards was a Louisiana governor so famous for corruption that when he ran for office again after serving federal prison time, he leaned into it completely. His official campaign slogan was, "Vote for the crook." It is important. He printed it on bumper stickers. His supporters wore it on shirts. He nearly won. Louisiana voters did not consider a convicted felon running on an explicit admission of criminal behavior to be disqualifying information. They considered it entertaining and honest, which in Louisiana political history might actually have made Edwin Edwards the most straightforward candidate the state had ever produced. 21. When Union forces captured New Orleans in 1862, Confederate leaders faced the humiliation of watching their most important southern city fall without being able to stop it. Their response was not a military counterattack or a strategic retreat. They set fire to their own cotton. Millions of dollars worth of Louisiana's most valuable export went up in smoke deliberately, burned by its own owners to prevent Union soldiers from profiting off it. The Confederacy destroyed its own economy out of pure spite, torched its own wealth with its own hands, and called it a matter of principle. 22. Louisiana Cajun French is not simply a Southern accent applied to standard French vocabulary. It is a completely separate language that a native speaker from Paris cannot understand at all. It was created by Acadian exiles who were forcibly deported from Canada by the British in 1755 and dumped into the Louisiana bayous with no outside contact. Isolated from France for generations, they developed their own entirely distinct dialect. When modern French tourists visit Louisiana and try to converse with elderly Cajun speakers, the interaction goes nowhere. Two people technically speaking the same language understand absolutely nothing the other person is saying. 23. St. Louis. Cemetery. Number 1 in New Orleans occupies exactly one city block of land. Inside that single city block lie thousands of human remains stacked in tiers inside shared stone vaults, layered across generations of burials going back centuries. The density of human remains packed into that one block of real estate is one of the highest concentrations of dead people found anywhere on the North American continent. Tourists visit it daily, take photographs, and then go eat lunch. New Orleans built one of the most densely packed burial sites in human history, directly in the middle of a busy neighborhood, and made it a tourist attraction. 24. The Port of New Orleans moves more cargo tonnage than almost any other port in the United States. Ships carrying billions of dollars worth of goods pass through its docks constantly, feeding supply chains that stretch across the entire country. The city surrounding that port has crumbling roads, underfunded schools, and a poverty rate nearly 3 times the national average. Economists who study regional development use New Orleans as a case study in how enormous commercial activity can exist directly alongside devastating poverty without one improving the other. The port gets richer, the city stays poor. Nobody has fully explained why. 25. Huey Long ran Louisiana in the 1930s the way a medieval king ran a kingdom. He controlled every judge, every sheriff, every school board appointment, and every road contract in the state from the governor's mansion. He wiretapped political opponents and rewrote state laws to eliminate anyone who challenged him. He was also genuinely beloved by millions of poor Louisianans because he built roads, funded schools, and distributed wealth downward in ways no previous governor had bothered to do. Louisiana produced a man who was simultaneously a functioning dictator and a genuine folk hero, and still cannot decide how to feel about him. 26. Louisiana named gumbo its official state dish, and then immediately made it impossible to define what gumbo actually is. Every parish makes it differently. Every family has a recipe they consider the only correct version. Some use okra, some refuse okra entirely. Some add filet powder. Some consider filet powder an insult. Seafood gumbo and chicken gumbo exist in open rivalry. A visitor asking for authentic gumbo in Louisiana will receive 10 completely different bowls and 10 completely different lectures about why every other version is wrong. The state dish of Louisiana has no recipe, and everyone who makes it is absolutely certain they are right. 27. Louisiana's wetlands function as a natural shock absorber for hurricanes, soaking up storm surge before it reaches populated areas. Scientists calculated that without the wetland buffer, Hurricane Katrina's flooding would have been significantly more catastrophic than it already was. The same state that depends on those wetlands for survival spent decades deliberately destroying them, dredging thousands of miles of canals through the marsh to support oil pipeline infrastructure. Louisiana systematically dismantled its own natural storm protection system to make oil extraction slightly more convenient, and then expressed genuine surprise when the hurricanes kept getting worse every decade. 28. In the 1990s, investigators discovered that several New Orleans police officers were not just accepting bribes or looking the other way on crime. They were actively working as contract killers while still employed and collecting paychecks from the city. Officers were taking murder-for-hire jobs on their days off and returning to patrol duty the following morning. The scandal was so thoroughly documented that it became a landmark case study in American law enforcement corruption. New Orleans had police officers who were simultaneously on the city payroll and the payroll of the people hiring them to commit the crimes they were supposed to prevent. 29. When Prohibition became federal law in 1920 and banned alcohol across the entire United States, New Orleans conducted a brief internal review of the situation and decided not to participate. Bars stayed open. Illegal alcohol moved freely through the city. City officials made public statements explaining that they personally disagreed with the federal law and saw no compelling reason to enforce it within their jurisdiction. The federal government had banned alcohol. New Orleans had banned the concept of banning alcohol. The city treated Prohibition as a suggestion from out-of-town relatives and politely ignored it for the entire 13 years it was in effect. 30. Louisiana is one of the most Catholic states in America, shaped by French and Spanish colonial religious culture running back centuries. Several of its parishes still enforce blue laws left over from Puritan-era Protestant tradition, including laws banning car dealerships from operating on Sundays. The same state whose geographic boundaries were drawn by the Catholic Church and whose culture revolves around Catholic feast days is simultaneously enforcing Protestant Sabbath restrictions that Catholic theology does not require. Louisiana managed to inherit contradictory religious legal traditions from two completely different Christian denominations and never bothered resolving which one actually applies. 31. Louisiana's above-ground tomb vaults do something in the summer heat that no other cemetery system in America replicates naturally. The stone chambers absorb the intense Louisiana sun, and the interior temperature climbs high enough to reduce human remains to ash within approximately 1 year of burial. No cremation equipment, no formal process, no additional cost. The Louisiana climate handles the entire procedure independently. When the year is up, the remains get pushed to the back, and the vault is ready for the next family member. Louisiana accidentally engineered a natural cremation system by simply building stone boxes in a very hot place. 32. Louisiana fishermen pull shrimp, oysters, crabs, and crawfish out of some of the most productive coastal waters in North America and supply nearly a third of all seafood consumed across the entire United States. The communities where those fishermen live rank among the poorest zip codes in the country. The people who catch and process the seafood that feeds the nation cannot afford to regularly eat the seafood they spend their lives catching. Louisiana built a billion-dollar industry on the labor of coastal communities and then made sure almost none of that $1 billion stayed anywhere near the people producing it. 33. Most states write a constitution once and then spend the following centuries amending it carefully as circumstances change. Louisiana has rewritten its entire constitution from scratch 11 times. Every time a new political faction gained enough power to govern the state, they looked at the existing governing document and decided the cleanest solution was to throw it out completely and write a new one from the beginning. The 11 complete rewrites across Louisiana's history means the state has treated its foundational legal document less like a permanent governing charter and more like a rough draft that each new administration felt personally entitled to crumple up. 34. In 1929, New Orleans streetcar workers went on strike and found themselves without income during a labor dispute that stretched on long enough to create a genuine financial crisis for the workers and their families. Two brothers named Martin, who owned a sandwich shop, decided to feed the striking workers for free. They called the incoming strikers their poor boys and made sandwiches on long French bread loaves packed with fried seafood and meat. The strike eventually ended, the workers went back to work, and the sandwich outlasted everyone involved. Louisiana accidentally named one of its most iconic foods after a labor protest. 35. Every American state has an official state tree, and most of them chose something dignified and land-based. Louisiana chose the bald cypress, a tree that grows with its base permanently submerged underwater and its roots adapted specifically to living inside a swamp. The bald cypress does not merely grow near water, it grows inside water, full-time, as a permanent biological condition. Louisiana selected as its official state symbol a tree that would drown in normal soil. It is the only state in the country whose official tree requires a swamp to survive, which probably says something accurate about Louisiana as a whole. 36. The 1876 presidential election between Rutherford Hayes and Samuel Tilden was one of the most disputed in American history, and Louisiana was directly responsible for a significant portion of that dispute. Several Louisiana parishes submitted vote tallies showing more ballots cast than registered voters actually existed in those parishes. The fraudulent numbers were not subtle miscalculations. They were impossible figures that election officials submitted with apparent confidence. The discrepancy directly influenced which electoral votes Louisiana certified, and those electoral votes influenced who became president of the United States. Louisiana committed election fraud so obvious the numbers were mathematically impossible and did it anyway. 37. When Louisiana seceded from the United States in January 1861, it did not immediately join the Confederacy. It declared itself a completely independent sovereign republic and existed in that status for 25 days before deciding to join the Confederate States of America. For those 25 days, Louisiana was technically its own separate nation with its own government and its own flag. Almost no American history textbook mentions this. Louisiana was briefly an independent country sitting between the United States and the Confederacy, lasting less than a month before picking a side, and nearly everyone alive today has never heard that it happened. 38. Creole cuisine is one of Louisiana's most celebrated and internationally recognized food traditions, drawing visitors to New Orleans restaurants from every corner of the world. Louisiana has never legally defined what Creole cuisine actually is. Any restaurant in the state can advertise itself as serving authentic Creole food without meeting a single documented culinary standard, because no such standard exists in law. The most famous food identity in Louisiana is completely unregulated, legally undefinable, and open to anyone's interpretation. A visitor eating what two different restaurants both call authentic Creole food may receive dishes that share no ingredients, no techniques, and no resemblance to each other. 39. Marie Laveau died in New Orleans in 1881 after decades operating as the city's most powerful and feared voodoo queen. Her tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 receives more daily visitors than the memorials of most American presidents. People still arrive every single day to draw X marks on the stone surface and leave offerings of rum, flowers, and personal notes asking for favors. A 19th-century voodoo priestess who practiced a religion the rest of America still debates has a more actively visited grave than most of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. New Orleans considers this completely normal. 40. Louisiana issues official city permits to fortune tellers, tarot card readers, and palm readers, classifying their services as legitimate taxable commercial businesses subject to municipal regulation. A psychic in New Orleans files paperwork, pays licensing fees, and operates under city oversight the same way a plumber or an electrician does. Most American cities treat psychic services as legally ambiguous at best and outright fraudulent at worst. Louisiana looked at the question of whether predicting the future should be regulated commerce, decided the answer was yes, and built an administrative framework around it. The state made mysticism a licensed profession and started collecting tax revenue from it. 41. Somewhere in Louisiana's legal history, a lawmaker decided that gargling in public was a serious enough problem to require official legislation. The law went onto the books, was never challenged, was never repealed, and remains technically enforceable today. A person standing on a New Orleans sidewalk gargling mouthwash can be reported to law enforcement by any offended bystander who files a formal complaint. Louisiana has laws against murder, laws against theft, and a specific dedicated law against the noise a person makes while rinsing their throat. The state looked at its list of public concerns and decided gargling belonged on it permanently. 42. Central Grocery in New Orleans invented the muffaletta sandwich sometime in the early 20th century, and the result was so aggressively large that selling it in quarters became the standard unit of measurement. The olive salad recipe layered inside the sandwich has been the subject of bitter generational disputes between rival New Orleans families who each claim their version is the authentic original. A sandwich became the centerpiece of decades-long interpersonal conflict between Louisiana families. People have argued about olive salad proportions with the same intensity normally reserved for property disputes and custody arrangements. Louisiana takes its sandwiches with extreme personal seriousness. 43. Louisiana's bayou waterways behave in ways that defy the basic logic most people apply to how water moves. The currents inside the bayou system regularly reverse direction depending on combinations of tidal pressure, wind patterns, and rainfall levels. A fisherman who leaves his dock in the morning with the water flowing north can return in the afternoon to find the same water flowing south. Lifelong locals who have spent decades navigating the same bayou channels still occasionally find themselves genuinely disoriented by the reversal. Louisiana built entire communities on top of a water system that cannot decide which direction it is going. 44. Jean Lafitte was a pirate operating out of Louisiana who smuggled goods, raided ships, and ran one of the most profitable criminal enterprises on the Gulf Coast. When the British threatened New Orleans in 1815, Andrew Jackson needed fighters badly enough to offer Lafitte a deal. Lafitte's pirates joined the battle, helped deliver a stunning American victory, and Lafitte personally received a full presidential pardon, wiping his entire criminal record clean. The moment the war ended and the pardon was secured, Lafitte went directly back to piracy with zero hesitation. America pardoned a pirate, he said thank you, and immediately resumed being a pirate. 45. In January 1811, roughly 500 enslaved people in Louisiana organized themselves into military formation, armed themselves, and began marching toward New Orleans in the largest slave revolt in American history. They moved in coordinated columns with flags and drums, led by men with genuine military experience. The uprising was suppressed violently, and its leaders were executed publicly. It was bigger than any other slave revolt on American soil. It involved more people, more organization, and more military discipline than any comparable event in the country's history. Almost no standard American history curriculum teaches it happened, and most Americans have never heard of it. 46. Louisiana has a law making it illegal to wear a mask in public. The same state also has a law making it legally required to wear a mask if you are riding on a Mardi Gras parade float. So the identical face covering that exposes a person to potential arrest on any normal day becomes a mandatory legal requirement on the one specific day the state has officially designated for public celebration. Louisiana created a situation where the same object is simultaneously prohibited and compulsory, depending entirely on what Tuesday of the year it happens to be. The state criminalized masks and then mandated them. 47. New Orleans hosts one of the largest and most attended music festivals in the United States every single year. The festival organizers selected a venue and arranged the stages in a layout that places live performances directly adjacent to, and in some cases, physically surrounding active historic cemeteries where real people are actually buried. The city reviewed this arrangement and found nothing worth reconsidering. New Orleans decided the most logical use of land containing centuries of human remains was as a backdrop for concert stages and vendor tents. The festival happens every year, and the people buried nearby have not formally complained. 48. Louisiana's sugarcane industry should have collapsed economically after the Civil War ended the plantation labor system that made it profitable. It did not collapse because the federal government immediately stepped in with protective tariffs shielding Louisiana sugar from cheaper foreign competition. Those tariff protections were extended, renewed, and maintained across multiple administrations for over 150 years. The Louisiana sugarcane became one of the longest continuously government-subsidized agricultural programs in all of American history. The industry survived not because it was competitive or efficient, but because the federal government decided for a century and a half that Louisiana sugar needed to be kept on life support. 49. Louisiana's French-speaking Cajun population had enough political influence in the mid-20th century to force a genuinely remarkable legal requirement onto the state government. As late as 1974, Louisiana law required that all newly passed state legislation be officially published in both English and French. A state that had been part of the United States for over 170 years was still legally required to translate its own laws into French because a significant portion of its population refused to accept that English alone was sufficient for governing their state. Louisiana held onto its French legal identity longer than any reasonable person expected it to. 50. Louisiana still has an active law requiring every single person who plants cotton, even a single stalk in a backyard garden, to officially report that cotton to the state government. The same law requires all cotton plants to be completely destroyed before December 31st of each year. The legislation was created to control the boll weevil, an agricultural pest that devastated cotton crops across the South. Louisiana eradicated the boll weevil entirely in 1978, and the law remained on the books anyway. Decades after the pest it was designed to fight was completely eliminated, Louisiana is still legally requiring gardeners to destroy their cotton plants every New Year's Eve. 51. Louisiana has a highest natural point, and it is called Driscoll Mountain, which sounds impressive until a person learns it stands exactly 535 feet above sea level. A highway overpass in Denver, Colorado sits higher than Louisiana's tallest geographical feature. The entire state east of the Mississippi River has no actual hills, no genuine elevation changes, and no terrain that would qualify as mountainous by any reasonable standard used anywhere else on Earth. Louisiana named a gentle slope a mountain, put it on official state maps with apparent pride, and has never once acknowledged that the rest of the country finds this quietly hilarious. 52. Angola State Prison in Louisiana sits on land that was originally operated as a slave plantation before the Civil War. After emancipation, the property became a prison, and the fields where enslaved people had worked under threat of violence became fields where incarcerated people worked under threat of punishment. The prisoners were overwhelmingly black. The work was cotton picking. The pay was pennies per hour. The practice continued well into the modern era, with very little public attention or official acknowledgement that the same land was being used for the same purpose by the same methods, with only the legal framework slightly rearranged. 53. When the 1811 German Coast Uprising was suppressed, Louisiana's authorities decided that executing the leaders was not a sufficient response, and that a more visible demonstration was necessary. The heads of executed revolt leaders were severed and mounted on poles along the Mississippi River Road. More than 40 decapitated heads were displayed on stakes stretching for miles along the riverbank, creating a corridor of executed rebels visible to everyone traveling that road. It was the largest public display of executed people in all of American history. Louisiana used human heads as roadside warning signs and left them there long enough to make absolutely certain the message was received. 54. Most American holidays occupy a single designated day on the calendar and the surrounding week at most. Louisiana's carnival season officially begins on January 6th, which is the Catholic Feast of Epiphany, and runs continuously until Mardi Gras Day itself, a span of 6 to 8 full weeks depending on the calendar year. Nearly 2 complete months of the Louisiana year are officially dedicated to building up to a single Tuesday. Parade schedules begin weeks in advance. Costume planning starts in January. Louisiana essentially decided that one party day was insufficient and engineered an entire extended pre-party season to make the actual day feel like a proper conclusion. 55. New Orleans developed a funeral tradition that inverts nearly every assumption other American cultures hold about how death should be publicly observed. When a person dies, their coffin is followed through the streets by a brass band, playing sorrowful music on the way to the cemetery. After the burial, the band switches to celebratory jazz, and everyone present, including complete strangers who joined the procession uninvited, dances through the neighborhood streets. Crashing a stranger's funeral procession in New Orleans is not considered disrespectful or inappropriate. It is considered enthusiastic community participation. Louisiana turned the worst day of a family's life into an open street party and called it a tradition. 56. In 1850, Louisiana was generating more per capita income than the state of New York, making it the wealthiest state in the American South and one of the richest in the entire country. That wealth was built entirely on enslaved plantation labor, producing sugar and cotton. Today, Louisiana sits consistently among the 3 poorest states in America by nearly every economic measurement available. No other state in the country has experienced an economic collapse of that magnitude across that time frame. Louisiana went from richer than New York to one of the poorest places in the nation, and the distance between those 2 points is genuinely staggering. 57. Buried somewhere inside New Orleans city law is a regulation stating that a woman is not permitted to drive an automobile unless her husband walks directly in front of the vehicle, waving a flag to alert oncoming traffic of her presence on the road. The law was written in an era when automobiles were new and assumptions about women were different. Automobiles became common. Assumptions changed. The law was never formally repealed and technically remains part of the city code. New Orleans has never removed the requirement that a grown woman needs a flag-waving escort to legally operate a vehicle within city limits. 58. Louisiana courts have ruled that false teeth qualify as a deadly weapon under the state's criminal statutes. The practical consequence of this ruling is that biting someone with dentures can be charged as aggravated battery rather than simple assault, carrying significantly heavier penalties. Louisiana is the only state in the country where a set of removable teeth sitting in a glass of water on a nightstand is legally classifiable as a dangerous instrument. A person in Louisiana can be formally charged with wielding a deadly weapon for an act that required them to first put their teeth in. The law treated dentures like a loaded firearm. 59. Louisiana's coastline is disappearing so rapidly that state cartographers face a problem no other mapping agency in America deals with regularly: Official maps of Louisiana's coastal geography become factually inaccurate within a few years of being printed because the land they document no longer exists by the time the maps reach circulation. Islands marked on published charts sink underwater. Coastal outlines shift measurably between survey cycles. The state's own geographic documentation cannot keep pace with the speed at which Louisiana is physically vanishing. Louisiana is the only state in America whose official maps have an expiration date because the land itself refuses to stay in place. 60. Say, in 1951, a group of Angola State Prison inmates called the Heel String Gang made a protest decision so extreme and so painful that it forced immediate institutional change. 31 prisoners voluntarily sliced through their own Achilles tendons to make themselves physically incapable of performing the brutal forced field labor that defined daily life at Angola. The self-inflicted injuries were so severe and the statement so impossible to ignore that prison officials formally abolished corporal punishment at Angola immediately following the protest. 31 men permanently damaged their own bodies to change a system that decades of complaints had failed to move. It worked the first time they tried it. 61. Louisiana spent 40 years as a Spanish colony between 1762 and 1800, and most people living there had no reliable way of knowing who actually owned the territory at any given moment. Colonial ownership paperwork traveled by sailing ship across the Atlantic Ocean, taking months to arrive. France secretly transferred Louisiana back to Spain, then secretly transferred it back to France. Then Napoleon sold it to America, all within a few decades. Ordinary Louisiana residents woke up on random mornings technically belonging to a different empire than the one they went to sleep under. Nobody asked them, and nobody told them until the paperwork eventually showed up. 62. Louisiana has a law still sitting on its official books stating that snoring is illegal unless all bedroom windows in the house are completely closed and securely locked before the snoring person falls asleep. A neighbor who can hear snoring through an open window has legal grounds to file a formal complaint with local authorities. Louisiana looked at the involuntary sounds a sleeping person makes while unconscious and decided that behavior required legislative intervention. The state regulates what happens inside a person's bedroom while they are completely asleep and unaware they are doing anything. Louisiana made it possible to receive a noise violation for something you cannot consciously control. 63. New Orleans' oldest active cemetery has been processing burials on the same single city block of land for centuries, and the mathematics of how it manages that are genuinely unsettling. The same tomb spaces are opened, used, cleared, and reused across generations of different families in an ongoing cycle that never stops. The square footage that holds the cemetery has remained constant, while the number of people buried there across centuries has climbed into the thousands. One city block has absorbed more human remains than most full-size cemeteries many times larger. New Orleans fit an impossible number of dead people into a very small piece of real estate and kept adding more. 64. Huey Long built Louisiana's state capitol building in Baton Rouge in the early 1930s and made a deliberate architectural statement in the process. The building stands 450 feet tall, making it the tallest state capitol in the entire United States, taller than the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C., by a significant margin. Long did not build it tall because the state government needed the space. He built it tall because he wanted Louisiana's seat of power to physically dominate every other government building in the country. Huey Long turned a government office building into a monument to his own political ego and made taxpayers fund the whole thing. 65. Most American states maintain at least a formal separation between the political process and the judicial system, keeping judges appointed through nonpartisan processes designed to insulate courts from direct political pressure. Louisiana elects its judges in fully partisan elections where candidates openly campaign under Democrat or Republican labels the same way any other politician does. Louisiana voters select their judges the exact same way they select their mayors and their state representatives. The people who decide guilt and innocence, interpret laws, and sentence convicted criminals in Louisiana got their jobs through the same electoral machinery as every other politician in the state. 66. Louisiana has a law on its books governing what pigs are legally permitted to eat, and the standards it sets are surprisingly rigorous. It is illegal in Louisiana to feed hogs any garbage or food scraps unless that food has been fully cooked on the premises immediately before being given to the animals. The cooking requirement is specific. The enforcement is real, and the standard it sets is stricter than the food safety regulations governing what gets served in numerous actual human school cafeterias across the state. Louisiana decided its hogs deserved freshly prepared hot meals and wrote that preference directly into enforceable law. 67. Louisiana is home to 7 species of venomous snakes, more than almost any other state in the country, which already creates a baseline level of reptile-related public safety concern. At some point, enough people brought live venomous snakes to Mardi Gras parade routes that Louisiana legislators decided the situation required a specific named law. It is now illegal to bring any snake within 200 yards of an active Mardi Gras parade. The fact that this law exists confirms that before it existed, people were regularly arriving at family parade celebrations carrying live snakes. Louisiana had to legislate snake attendance at parades because enough people thought bringing snakes to parades was a reasonable idea. 68. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005, the federal levee system failed catastrophically and flooded most of the city. Investigations conducted afterward revealed that Army Corps of Engineers staff had identified serious design flaws in the levee construction years before the storm arrived. The problems were documented internally. The fixes were never implemented. The warnings were never made public. The levees failed exactly where the engineers had privately predicted they might fail. New Orleans did not flood because a hurricane was unexpectedly powerful. It flooded because known engineering failures were left unaddressed for years while over 1 million people lived directly behind the defective walls. 69. When France formally transferred Louisiana to Spain in 1768, the sitting French colonial governor Charles Aubry received the orders from Paris and passed them along to his colleague Antoine de Ulloa, the incoming Spanish governor. The French colonists of Louisiana responded to this transfer by staging a revolt, forcing de Ulloa out and refusing to accept Spanish rule entirely. France's response was to send a new governor with enough military force to restore order, arrest the rebellion's leaders, and ship the French governor, who had failed to manage the transition, back to France in chains. Louisiana's colonial handoff required arresting its own sitting governor and physically removing him from the continent. 70. New Orleans invented the jazz funeral and, in doing so, created a tradition that treats the day of a person's death as an occasion for dancing through the streets with a live brass band. The procession moves solemnly to the cemetery with slow music and then transforms completely the moment the burial ends. The band launches into celebratory jazz. The mourners start dancing, and the parade moves through neighborhood streets with genuine joy. Louisiana looked at death, which every other culture treats as an occasion for quiet grief, and decided the appropriate response was a brass band and a street parade. New Orleans made dying look like the best possible reason to throw a party. 71. Mardi Gras parade floats in New Orleans have been injuring and occasionally killing spectators since the earliest parades rolled through the city streets. The floats are enormous, the crowds press close, and the tradition of throwing beads and trinkets from moving platforms creates genuine physical hazards every single year. Louisiana's response to decades of parade-related injuries was never to slow the floats, reduce their size, or create meaningful separation between the vehicles and the crowd. The response was to write increasingly specific rules about bead-throwing technique and then build the floats even larger the following year. Louisiana made the dangerous thing bigger and called it an improvement. Louisiana does not make sense, and honestly, we would not have it any other way. A state that buries people above ground, or elects convicted felons, loses a football field of land every 100 minutes, and still throws the greatest party on earth every single year. So tell us in the comments which one of these blew your mind the most. If you made it this far, you already know what to do. Hit like, subscribe to Dumbest Things, and we will see you in the next one.